good morning and thanks for staying tuned. Welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akeredoluwale. The headlines. Presidents Joe Biden and Vladimir Zelensky planning to meet in Washington for Ukrainian president's first trip since Russian invasion began. And the United States is to announce $1.8 billion in new assistance during Mr. Zelensky's visit, including a Patriot system. And the United Kingdom alleges Russia is to give Iran advanced military components in exchange for drones. Let's begin with that story out of the United States and which broke overnight. President Joe Biden and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky are planning to meet at the White House later on today, according to very many sources familiar with the planning, in a Washington visit that is tentatively scheduled to include an address to a joint session of Congress. Mr. Zelensky is already on his way to Washington for the visit that marks his first trip outside of Ukraine since the Russian invasion began in February of this year. The visit to the White House, which hasn't been completely finalized in terms of details and remains tightly held due to security concerns, will include a meeting with President Biden and top administration officials and his plans to coincide with the administration's intent to send Ukraine a new defense assistance package. Meanwhile, a United States official has said President Joe Biden's administration will announce a $1.8 billion military aid package for Kiev, which will for the first time include a Patriot missile battery and precision-guided bombs for Ukrainian fighter jets. U.S. officials described the details of the aid package on condition of anonymity. The $1.8 billion aid package, due to be announced, signals an expansion in the kinds of advanced weaponry the United States is sending Ukraine to bolster the country's air defenses against what has been an increasing barrage of Russian missile attacks. And British Defense Minister Ben Wallace says Russia intends to give Iran advanced military components in exchange for hundreds of drones. Speaking earlier on Tuesday, the European Union's foreign policy chief, Joseph Borrell, had told Iran's foreign minister that Tehran should immediately halt military support for Russia. Iran has acknowledged supplying Moscow with drones, but said they were sent before the war in Ukraine, where Russia has used them to target power stations and civilian infrastructure.
Expose that deal. In fact, I have just now, Sir Roger. Thank you, Sir Roger. Iran has become one of Russia's top military backers. In return for having supplied more than 300 kamikaze drones, Russia now intends to provide Iran with advanced military components, undermining both Middle East and international security. And we must expose that deal. In fact, I have just now, Sir Roger. Make no mistake, Mr. Speaker, the UK's assistance to Ukraine will remain unwavering, and I'm grateful to the Prime Minister for his continuing support. As Russia has changed its tactics throughout this conflict, so we have changed the type of level of our support in the United Kingdom. For example, it is Britain's expertise and advice that is now helping Ukraine better coordinate and synchronise their air defence. Our advice helps Ukraine target incoming Russian or Iranian kamikaze drones. We always make sure our support is calibrated to avoid escalation, but the House should be under no illusion that it is Russia that is escalating its attacks on Ukraine, and I have made this point clear to my counterpart, Minister Shoigu, in Moscow. Human rights.
And two Turkish military transport aircraft that had been stranded in Ukraine since the start of the war about 10 months ago have safely returned to Turkey. The Defense Ministry released a video of two of its aircraft taxiing on tarmac, which it said arrived from Ukraine. The two Airbus A400M military transport planes of the Turkish Air Force had flown to Kiev Boryspil Airport shortly after midnight on February 24th, just as Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine. The Defense Ministry said in a statement that the two aircraft had gone to Kiev to deliver humanitarian supplies and evacuate Turkish citizens, but it became stuck at Kiev's airport when Ukrainian airspace was closed due to the outbreak of hostilities. The statement adds that the two aircraft left Ukraine yesterday and arrived at the airport in the central Turkish city of Kayseri in the evening. Let's head to North Korea, where its leader, Kim Jong-un's sister, says the country is ready to test fire an intercontinental ballistic missile at a normal trajectory, a flight pattern that could prove the weapon can threaten the continental United States of America. In a statement carried by the Korean Central News Agency, Kim Yong-jong, the top official in her brother's regime, also dismissed experts' skepticism surrounding North Korea's ICBM technology progress, specifically about the re-entry capability of its weapons. ICBMs are fired into space, where they speed along outside the atmosphere before their payloads, that's nuclear warheads, undergo a fiery re-entry process, much like a space shuttle or space capsule, before plunging down on their targets. To date, North Korea has fired ballistic missiles that go hundreds of miles into space, then re-enter the atmosphere at steep angles, with most falling into waters between North Korea and Japan. Let's talk now to Victoria Serradia, Senior Fellow at the Forum of Trans-Regional Studies. She joins us virtually from Berlin in Germany. Good morning to you, Victoria. Thank you for your time.
Good morning.
We are hearing, of course, that that story broke overnight, and even now, as you and I speak, many of the details are still shrouded in a lot of secrecy. But President Zelensky himself has tweeted that he is on his way to the United States for what would be a historic visit, first time since this war began. What do you think he's going to ask for in the United States? What are the expectations, really?
First of all, his symbolic visit was built up when it started yesterday in Bakhmut, at the hottest spot of Ukrainian military defense currently for months in Ukraine. So yesterday he was seen there and he met the military. And a few hours after that, Ukraine received the news that he's on the way to the US. So he's traveling from the hottest parts of the military defense to United States. And I think this has a certain symbolic meaning, both for Ukrainians and a message for the world, how he perceives his visit. And what I see from our local experts' comments, that he is going to ask for even stronger weapons, which might be shared by US with Ukraine, for example, for Grey Eagle drones or ATSMS military missiles, which allow even further strengthen Ukrainian defense system.
Now, this is happening, and I know that for those who are looking at the situation like you, it's probably no coincidence. President Zelensky, we saw on the screen a minute ago the tweet I was referring to, where he confirmed that he was actually on the way to the United States. And then just about 24 hours or thereabouts ago, the Russian president was in Belarus on another rare visit. President Putin rarely goes outside Russia, and when he does, it's for very high-profile visits. This one, very high-profile, although the details are still scant. What do you think both sides are doing at this time, with President Zelensky in the U.S. and President Putin just coming back from Belarus?
So, if we are talking about Russian president, he is building up his support and he is trying to press Belarus for even further support of his activities, of his fights against Ukraine. And there were a lot of discussions whether he will be successful and whether he'll be able to press Belarus into much more active military action. So far, we do not see that this might be happening, but also the question is the weather, which is not cold enough, and the part of the between Ukraine and Belarus requires a much colder weather for heavy weaponry being able to cross border and launch the attack. So the question is, what were real discussions, because the press conference was quite vague and it was very difficult to understand what was the purpose of the visit. There were not clear messages during this press conference. So the only issue is, and again, Ukrainian experts are warning that if Belarus will step in together with Russia and launch an attack from the north, then Europe will experience a huge wave of new migration. Because after experiencing what was happening and all the atrocities what they're happening around Kiev during the February-March previous this year, people will be immediately leaving their cities. They will not stay and wait that they will find themselves under occupation. And for this reason, Europe would really be covered by a huge wave of people from north and center of the country.
Let me go back to the visits to the United States. So many of the comments I've read ever since the story broke are that for President Zelensky to be willing to take the risk to leave his country for the first time to go as far as the United States. I mean, he's not just leaving Ukraine, he's leaving continental Europe and going all the way to the United States. There must be quite a bit in it, in addition to what you've said about the symbolism of going to thank the country's biggest supporter in person. And then, of course, the possibility that he'll be addressing the joint session of Congress. Do you think that from the side of the United States, seeing this man in person and not on TV or via video link, seeing him in person on the ground and so on, is also a measure of the confidence that Ukraine now has that the momentum is with it, and that while the president is away, nothing really major can happen, which is why he's undertaking the trip?
Yes, first of all, it's showing that Ukrainian defense is strong enough to allow his president to leave at least for a short trip, and that's for the security reasons he can travel, as you said, even cross-continentally. But it's also very important because currently there are very intensive debates linked to the upcoming elections in US about the budget cuts. And of course, Ukraine and military support of Ukraine and humanitarian support of Ukraine are very important elements and parts of budget spendings of the US. So I guess it's also important politically to debate or discuss with the president the pressing needs of Ukraine, because some of congressmen were questioning to what extent these needs are pressing, or maybe different needs should be addressed. So I guess this message is very important, and possibility to discuss it with Ukrainian president. And on the side of Ukrainian president, it's very important to deliver the message that yes, US has been sharing stronger and more weapons and is the main military partner of Ukraine. But as we observe, unfortunately, still the missiles can reach critical infrastructure. And with unfolding winter colds, this is extremely important for Ukrainians and for their survival, because the biggest cities, including Kyiv and Odessa and Kharkiv, are regularly cut from electricity completely for many hours. And this creates humanitarian issues which are building up.
The situation in Europe itself, which is where you are, is a bit more complicated. When the war started, the EU was one alongside NATO in supporting Ukraine. But the energy crisis and the economic and cost of living crisis that it has brought on has tended to affect more countries, or some countries more than others, both in terms of being able to afford or absorb the changes in the prices and all of that. And Ukraine itself has economic difficulty from all the things you've said, infrastructure damage, the fact that people cannot go out, work is not going on normally. But do you see a situation where, given that the United States has remained firm and resolute in this backing. The EU and NATO will probably have no choice but to continue. Or do you see a situation where there might be one or two countries that may not be able to keep up with the others because of this economic difficulty?
Of course, there are discussions, and we observed how difficult it was to have a cap prices for first oil and then gas. And there were very intensive debates about the mechanism of reinforcement. But still, we observe that EU is quite unanimous. They're able to get to the solutions. And of course, when US, and we also observe UK, which is playing very intensive and leading role in sharing the weapons or discussing the needs of Ukraine, being Ukraine's ambassador in European continent. And then if we observe after new steps taken by US or UK, then gradually other countries are joining. For example, France also shared with Ukraine the most advanced defense system 2 days ago, which arrived to Ukraine. So this really changes the discourse and changes the situation. And we do not observe so far very building up camps within the European Union. There are discussions, there are different opinions, as you said, due to economic situation and in smaller countries, in smaller economies, but they hope they will overcome that.
I can't let you... Oh, please go on. Please go on.
You feel also on the ground. For example, even in Germany, in a majority of offices and different public spaces, there are limits for the temperature of heating. So you do observe a lot of austerity measures happening even within the most richest economies of the EU.
I can't let you go without asking you about the situation on ground. And when I say the situation on ground, I mean back in Ukraine. The missile attacks that have hit critical infrastructure, reports indicate, have left quite a number of people without heating, without water in some cases, and obviously without electricity in many of the cases. And this is happening side by side with extreme weather conditions. You are not in Ukraine, but what are you hearing about what is going on at home in terms of how people are coping with these extremities of conditions?
Unfortunately, the situation is very bad and actually deteriorating with the colder weather coming into the country. But at the same time, experts expected that there will be a new big wave of cross-border migration, that people will be living for nearest European countries. We do not observe this. So we had a small wave, small changes of numbers, but so far people are still trying to cope within the country by building up capacities for the different places of co-working spaces with some electricity, heating, and so on. However, it really creates a big issues connected both to living conditions. It's extremely cold, water is not running properly, and people are freezing. And also, it creates a lot of issues with medical support and educational systems, because those who are staying within the countries, if there is no electricity, they cannot connect to online to either their schools or universities, or many businesses, smaller businesses are hit by that. So situation is very bad. And especially we see that these missile attacks are happening recurrently. So as soon as some infrastructure is repaired and people hope that now situation will stabilize, in a week or so, Russia hits it again. Ukraine manages to catch most of the missiles or drones, but still its system is not built well enough to catch all the missiles and drones sent by Russia, and they are using very different territories, very different spaces, so it's very difficult to intercept them.
Indeed, the situation fairly dire there, and one can only hope that services can be restored as quickly as they have been damaged. Victoria Sereda, thank you for your perspective and time this morning. Compliments of the season. We're in the Christmas week. I hope you have a good Christmas ahead in spite of the circumstances. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your time, and we also hope that Ukraine will have its peaceful days during the Christmas, because the last day of St. Nicholas Day was exactly the day of Russian missile attack. So
Indeed.
We hope that Christmas will not be the same for Ukrainians.
We hope so too. Thank you so very much. After the break, World Health Organization says 1 in 4 Ukrainians are at risk of mental disorders. Details after the break. Please stay on with us. Welcome back. Thanks for staying tuned. President Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to Ukrainian troops on the front lines in Bakhmut comes as Russian forces intensify their efforts to break Ukrainian resistance in several parts of Donetsk region. With the conflict now 300 days old, the Russians have been pushing some of their newly mobilized troops into fierce battles in both Luhansk and Donetsk. But the Ukrainian military consistently reports that Russian assaults have been rebuffed. The military's general staff has been saying, quote, the enemy continues to focus its efforts on conducting offensive weapons in Bakhmut and at Veka regions, both in Donetsk. The Russians were trying to recover ground lost in September along the borders of Donetsk and Luhansk. But a statement issued yesterday adds that they were also intensifying assaults immediately to the west of the city of Donetsk. Much of the Russian fire comes from multiple rocket launches. The Ukrainian General Staff said the Russians had carried out more than 80 multiple launch rocket systems attacks on Monday alone. And the Russian Defense Ministry has said that China and Russia will begin a week-long joint live-fire naval exercise in the East China Sea today, as the two partners step up cooperation in an increasingly tense Western Pacific. The statement said the exercises, dubbed Maritime Cooperation 2022, will feature Russia's Pacific Fleet flagship, the missile cruiser Varyag, a frigate and 2 corvettes, adding that China's People's Liberation Army and Navy will send 2 destroyers, 2 patrol ships, a multi-purpose supply ship, and a diesel submarine. However, the Chinese military has yet to comment on the statement from Moscow. A World Health Organization official, Jaro Harbich, says 10 million people, or about a quarter of Ukraine's population, may suffer from mental health disorders in relation to the conflict there. Severe conditions, including post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, caused by distressing events, are having cases rising after 10 months of conflict, prompting a separate UN agency to launch online support services. Ukraine's healthcare system has been under pressure since Russia invaded in February. So far, the WHO's data shows that there have been at least 700 attacks on its healthcare system, and Russia's increase in attacks on critical infrastructure since October has added to the challenges by causing blackouts. Mr. Harbich says respiratory diseases would increase with the cold weather and insufficient heating, as with car accidents caused by unlit streets due to blackouts.
Mental health impacts of this war cannot go unnoticed. Recently, the roadmap to address mental health needs for more than 10 million people was adopted by the Cabinet of Ministers in Ukraine, together with many partners. And now we need to address the mental health needs, varying from anxiety and stress to more severe conditions. Since 24th of February, WHO has verified more than 700 attacks on healthcare, impacting facilities, supplies, transport, and other means injuring and killing healthcare workers and patients. Ukraine's health system is resilient, but faces many challenges amid of an increase in attacks on critical infrastructure through the country, which have been intensified since 10th of October and lasted already 2 months. And the winter, we will see increase of diseases and health needs as people struggle to heat their homes and battle with the freezing temperatures. First, we see respiratory diseases, infectious diseases, but also cardiovascular diseases to be more prevalent. And that will mean we need to actually scale up the healthcare during the ongoing war.
From there, let's take a look at the business update from this conflict. Laddie Williams joins me. Morning, Laddie.
Good morning.
It's midweek. There's good news. I don't know if you want to call it that. The World Bank has approved an additional $610 million in funding for Ukraine. What's this about? What does it cover?
And obviously, you know, this comes on the back of what we discussed yesterday. We see the IMF trying to make it easy for Ukraine to actually get, you know, funding right now. As we said, you know, they need all the funding, you know,
that they can get,
you know, at this time with critical infrastructure, you know, impacted by, you know, the war right now. So the World Bank have set aside another $500 billion loan, you know, to the country to, you know, help them with, you know, access to health care, you know, solve some of their electricity issues, because a lot of Ukrainians now suffering blackouts, you know,
which speaks to the mental health issues that the WHO is warning about.
Because I can imagine how traumatizing it is, you know, going through a war and all of that. So PTSD issues definitely would be a problem. But, you know, this loan is actually supposed to help, help as much as possible to ease some of their critical infrastructure that, you know, has been destroyed because of the war, to help rebuild. So we see the International Bank for Reconstruction also, you know, helping out, you know, to make sure these loans actually get to Ukraine. And we see that they're mostly backed by, this one is actually backed by Britain. You know, so at the end of the day, you know, somebody's gonna
pay for it.
Pay for it. You know, so going forward, it is, you know, a welcome loan this time, and obviously more is still expected. Right now, they've mobilized about this will be added to the $18 billion already mobilized, and part of that, about $16 billion, has already been disbursed. So, you know, it's much, you know, needed for Ukraine at this time.
And now, on the other side of the conflict, the Bank of Russia is to test international crypto payments with companies. Right. Now, this has been building slowly. First, they tried to see how it works, and then they try to take it over and make sure that they are the ones who are running it.
Exactly.
And now they're going to use companies.
Yeah. So, you know, it's we know the Central Bank of Russia, that they've been against, you know, legalizing crypto in Russia, because, you know, you as a central banker, you want to have, you know, control of your financial system, and, you know, to them this is a risk, you know, for that. But we're seeing the Central Bank of Russia softening, you know, now towards crypto, because the sanctions, you know, leveled on Russia have, you know, hampered their international settlement. So trying to see how they can use, you know, cryptocurrency just for international settlement, you know, with trading partners, you know, outside the country. So they're doing this testing phase now with some companies, you know, within Russia. So if you're interested, if you're a company in Russia, you can, you know, actually present yourself for testing, you know, these payment transactions. And obviously we know it's needed. You know, we know they need to, you know, get some of these payments, you know, even though they're not able to go through SWIFT. We want to see how they can use cryptocurrency, because we know how...
Of course, that can bypass.
Exactly.
SWIFT.
We know how decentralized, you know, cryptocurrencies are. So we know they've been quite bullish, you know, on cryptocurrency since this war started, and it's they're getting more bullish, you know, and it's interesting to see what 2023 holds. You know, even though we know that the crypto market has been through a lot in 2022.
That's putting it mildly.
Mildly.
Now, it's not only Europe, it's not only Russia that is complaining about this price cap.
Right.
Algeria has bucked the trend on the African continent, and it too is slamming the issue of price cap.
Yeah.
Because Algeria has a lot of gas to sell.
Oh yes, they're the top gas exporter in Africa, and they've analyzed this whole gas price cap issue. And for the energy minister there, he's saying that this would actually disrupt upstream, investments for the gas sector. At the end of the day, there's always a problem when you want to set prices, for commodities, and they are, already hampering on their constraints, the constraints that this will actually bring for the market. Because at the end of the day, if you fix prices, there would be limitations to how, the price movement can go. But we know why Europe is doing this. They're trying to, protect their citizens and businesses from, high prices. But obviously, this is it's more like a seller's market, and to get the sellers to actually, fall in line, it's not going to be easy. And we're already seeing, Algeria already sounding
squealing.
Squealing.
I believe that's the word.
Exactly. At this time, and they're a big exporter of gas, so. Obviously, this would definitely sway the market, one way or the other. But they are against it, and a couple of other countries too, because markets need to be free.
Yeah, in order to determine prices when they are good, and so just as they need to be free to determine them when they are not so good.
They are seeing the risk to the distortion for that market at this time.
It's midweek, but not been a very pleasant week for the markets. How are they looking this midweek?
So the markets, the week started quite rough, for most of the markets in the U.S., but now we're seeing a little reprieve this morning. The U.S. markets closed in the green yesterday. We saw the Dow Jones Industrial Average, that closed in the green, up by 0.28%. We saw the S&P 500 up 0.10%, helped by, earnings with Nike and, some other big companies. But we saw the Nasdaq just marginally, up. This morning, the futures looking green. Investors still, analyzing the whole, digesting the whole rate outlook for 2023. So it's cautious optimism we're seeing in the markets now. And back here, we're seeing the market still, trying to hold on to that bullish move that started sometime last week, and we're still seeing that, continue now. And obviously, investors are looking ahead for that 50K level. Talking about the NGX, the local boss here in Nigeria. All eyes on that 50K level if we hit it in December.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Ladi. It's midweek. Let's hope that some kind of rally, is it the Santa rally?
The Santa rally
eventually makes its way into the markets ahead of Christmas this weekend.
Right.
But thank you. More on that, of course, Business Morning and in Business Incorporated.
Thank you.
Let's turn our attention to further analysis. Let us speak to Nigeria's former ambassador to Switzerland and the United Nations offices in Geneva. Ambassador Humphrey Ojako joins us virtually. Good morning to you, Your Excellency. Thank you for your time. Your Excellency, can you hear me? I hope the connections are good this morning.
It's good. Good morning. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you. Thank you for your time this morning. Are you as surprised by the rest of the world that the Ukrainian president, in spite of what's going on in his country, is going to the United States to visit President Biden?
It is a surprise, but not completely, because without the United States, I think Ukraine is virtually gone. So the symbolism of his visit to the United States is very strong. Secondly, elections are coming up in the United States, presidential elections in the next year or so. No one knows how long this Russia-Ukraine war is going to last. And I think Zelensky is going to be needing America's support, whoever becomes the president. So if he has the opportunity to address a joint session of Congress and the Senate, of course, then he is going to try to win hearts and minds so that America will sustain it, holding Europe and the West together to continue to support the Ukraine war, which nobody expected to last this long, to become this destructive, to become this expensive. Listening to your own analysis, I've been hearing billions of dollars from the United States, from Europe, France, Germany. We're hearing of billions from United Nations systems. We're hearing the same from the International Bank for Development and Reconstruction. All of these maybe are compelling enough for Zelensky to take that risk and step out of Ukraine at this time.
The other thing, of course, is that every time I speak to you, I want to leverage on your deep knowledge of diplomacy. Is there, in your view, a coincidence between this visit and the fact that just over 24 or so hours ago, the Russian president was in Belarus to strengthen ties? That's the way it was put. And even though we don't know the complete details of the conversation that took place and what agreements were reached, the Ukrainians are fearful that if Belarus steps into the conflict, then they're going to be faced with like a pincer movement. Two countries will be facing them on two sides. So the attempt to shore up support from what you've described as Ukraine's biggest backer, there's no coincidence in that, is there?
Indeed, there might well be some coincidence, because looking at this war, we have to look at three dimensions now. The first dimension being the role of the United States and the West. The second being the Putin understanding that the war wasn't going exactly the way he must have envisaged it would. So trying to drag Belarus into physical presence in the war, physical participation, using Belarus as a launching ground for assault on Ukraine, is going to be escalating this war. And yes, Ukraine will do whatever is in its power, which power, of course, lies in the West, to ensure that even if there's this dual pincer movement, they'll be able to contain the assault and not collapse. That is, Russia has been pounding Ukraine, destroying its power infrastructure, water, all sorts of issues are rising for them. That is why they are now asking for the Patriot missile, which is a long-range defense, air defense system. That will probably give them a little succor on the air side. But on the ground forces side, it's not even going to be an easy ride for Russia for one reason. Because for the first time, Putin himself is admitting that there is serious problem in the 4 regions he annexed a few months ago. And that problem is not from the Ukrainians, it is from the natives of those places, who some of whom they are now describing as saboteurs, as spies for Ukraine and the West and so on. So we can begin to see that referendum that led to the creation, the annexation of those places, was simply not just illegal, but it was also a kind of a sham. Most of the people are still they are sabotaging the Russian effort in those places. That creates a big problem for Putin, for which he's trying to open another front when the current front is not even going well. Is it meant to overstretch the Ukrainian forces operating in the eastern flank? Let us wait and see how it will go.
You mentioned it, of course, when you talked about the efforts to keep the United States on side of Ukraine, regardless of the politics that is going on within the United States itself. You and I had spoken about it when the Republicans looked like they were going to take either one or both houses of Congress in the ahead of the midterms, and they were already making it clear that they do not intend to proceed along exactly the same lines as the Democrats had proceeded since this conflict started in February. Now, they have, in fact, taken one of the two houses. They didn't get the Senate, but they got the House of Reps. And that means that it's not going to be as easy to pass spending bills to support Ukraine or to even supply Europe with gas from strategic reserves, all the things that require congressional approval. Now, this visit by Mr. Zelensky, you touched on it, but I wanted you to expand on that a bit. How much of a difference can his physical presence in the United States make to, for example, the Republicans' support for Ukraine and its robustness, just like the Democrats, especially when we have elections ahead, which you mentioned, and the fact that Donald Trump has made himself a candidate, and we all know what's going on with his attempt to contest yet again, and what is going on with the Congress as to whether or not he will be indicted for rebellion and all of that.
In fact, without going deep into American politics and its partisan struggles, the fact remains that the Republican Party is usually the party that talks a strong foreign policy, strong defense policy, and would strongly probably be expected to defend the Western interests, American and European interest in Ukraine. But the problem is, as you mentioned, if a transactional president like Mr. Trump takes over the White House again, if that happens, then Ukraine may have a lot of work in its hands. And that work will be to have the two houses, the Senate and Congress, on his side, so that no president who tries to do deals with national security issues, particularly that of Ukraine, as Trump had tried to do in the past, would stop American assistance going as steadily and as quickly as it is going to the Ukraine at this time. We can see 20 billion of US money going into Ukraine. We can see another 1.8 billion coming on the heels of Zelensky's trip to the United States today. We can see the Patriot missile being announced to go into Ukraine and so on. Would that continue under an administration that is transactional? It possibly could if Zelensky is able to persuade as many Republicans as Democrats in his meeting with both houses of Congress today, that yes, this is also in the ultimate interest of the United States to ensure that Ukraine is preserved. There's another reason I think a Republican government may not renege on the support for Ukraine, and that is the current activities of Russia in the Arctic zone, bordering on Europe, and even extending into the Barents area, that connects Russia
to the United States.
With the United States itself. Yes. So the question is, why is Russia expanding seriously into those places? And NATO is beginning to respond to that. If that is sustained, and that's pure escalation of this thing, we don't know where it will end. Russia is holding military naval exercises with China. Again, these are suggestive of what might come in the next few years. Would a Republican government in the United States wish to give up on its global influence because of domestic politics? I do not think so.
Indeed. We'll have to wait and see. I borrowed those words from you, Your Excellency. Ambassador Humphrey Ojiako, thank you for your perspective this morning, and thank you for your time. Compliments of the season, by the way. Wishing you a very good Christmas ahead.
Too.
Thank you very much.
You too. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And when we return, baking Christmas cookies lifts spirits of Ukrainian refugee family in Prague. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. We're on the home stretch now. Ukraine's former world heavyweight boxing champion Vladimir Klitschko has condemned the recent agreement between the International Boxing Association and the World Boxing Association, which plans to reinstate Russian fighters in its rankings. Mr. Klitschko, whose brother Vitaly is also a former world heavyweight boxing champion, but is mayor of Kiev, called the collaboration a stain on the coat of the noble art in a Twitter post. A cooperation agreement was signed on November the 28th in Mexico City between WBA President Gilberto Jesus Mendoza and Russian businessman Umar Kremlev, president of the IBA. With the Russian invasion of Ukraine continuing, Mr. Klitschko added that the decision to reinstate Russian boxers is an indelible moral fault. And the president of the Russian Olympic Committee, Stanislav Pozdnyakov, has been re-elected for another term. Mr. Pozdnyakov had been at the helm of the Russian Olympic Committee since 2018. He is a 4-time Olympic champion in saber fencing, in addition to being a 10-time world champion. Mr. Pozdnyakov says his immediate attention would be on alternative ways that Russia could participate in the 2024 Olympic Games. And finally, on the program, as Christmas approaches, Vasyl Kimyaretsnets and his family decorate their small flat in Prague as the smell of Christmas cookies fills the room. Vasyl, Marina, and their 2 children, 12-year-old Lilia and 9-year-old Uril, come from eastern Ukraine. But in 2014, when Russia-backed separatists wrested it from Kiev's control, they moved to the western part of the country. It was after an explosion near their home in Kiev in the early days of the war that the family decided to move again. They now live in the Czech capital, where Vasyl works as a translator in the Prague district. The family plans to send presents to relatives in Ukraine, but only the ones living in unoccupied regions. Our parents are living in the occupied territories, and we don't know anything about them and can't send them anything. Next to decorated Christmas tree branches hangs a painting of Ukrainian soldiers made by Vasyl's daughter Lilia. She started painting back in Ukraine and now has a teacher in Prague who helps her improve. Every now and again, stories of hope in the midst of the most dark conditions. But that's how we end our program this midweek. Thanks for being with us. My name is Ladi Akari. Updates are there throughout the day, which clearly within the world today. We watch out for that. Have a pleasant day ahead. Good morning.